everyone. This is Lynette Fraga, Executive Director at Child Care Aware of America, and I would like to welcome you all and thank you for joining today's webinar presentation, which is the official kickoff to our Raise Your Hand webinar series. Last week, we pre-launched our series with a webinar on the federal budget and the shutdown, and you can view a recording of that webinar on our YouTube channel. Child Care Aware of America's webinar series is a 5-month campaign to help shape the ongoing national conversation around various opportunities that enrich the state of child care and early education in this country. The Raise Your Hand webinar series strives to raise awareness about federal and state early learning opportunities that support child care, connect participants with content experts, and inspire all who care about early learning to take action to better the lives of working families. Today's webinar, Early Learning Polling, Making the Case for Early Education, will be presented by Kris Perry, Executive Director of the First 5 Years Fund, and Catriona Macdonald, Campaign Manager of Grow America Stronger and President of Linchpin Strategies. Kris has had a distinguished career bringing resources and support to parents, caregivers, and early learning workforce professionals to ensure children grow up healthy and ready to succeed in school and in life. Most recently, Kris served as Executive Director of First 5 California, fostering their emergence as one of the most well-known and respected advocates for early childhood development on the state and national levels. Prior to that, Kris served as Executive Director of First 5 San Mateo County and has worked for more than 12 years in various capacities, including Child Abuse Investigator, Family Preservation Case Manager, and Program Manager. Likewise, Kris's co-presenter, Catriona Macdonald, has had an illustrious career in federal policy, working on a wide range of social policy issues on the Hill, in the executive branch, and as a consultant. Currently, Catriona is Grow America Stronger's campaign manager and is president of Linchpin Strategies, a government relations and strategic consulting firm dedicated to achieving meaningful results for a select group of nonprofit and corporate clients. In prior years, Catriona has worked on Capitol Hill in various capacities for Senator Edward Kennedy, Congressman Steny Hoyer, and Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro. Macdonald's experience in the executive branch includes working as a budget and policy analyst in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Management and Budget at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. As you can hear, these two individuals are tremendous and bring a tremendous set of experiences to us. And before I turn it over to our presenters, I want to point your attention to the chat box function, which should be located on the right side of your screen. Please use this function to submit or ask questions, and Jasmine Smith on my staff will be sure to field those questions during the course of the webinar. If you have more general questions, please submit those at the conclusion of the webinar via the chat box. Thank you so much. Without further delay, I turn it over to our experts. Kris?
Hi, and thanks, Lynette. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to listen to us describe to you the work of the First 5 Years Fund, and more importantly, to this large coalition effort to bring new federal and state dollars to early learning programs across the country. First 5 Years Fund was launched 7 years ago and has focused very heavily on increasing investments in early learning at the federal level, as well as improving those investments that are already in place to make them more supportive of you and the work you do and the families you serve. I will waste no more time in getting right to these poll results, but before I do that, I want to tell you what inspired us to even do a poll. As many of you may recall, in the President's State of the Union and then later in the budget he proposed, for the first time we saw a very large new investment in early learning included. And we at First 5 Years Fund saw that as a terrific opportunity to start to advocate in both across the aisle in a very bipartisan way, as we always had been, but with new vigor. And in order to do that, we thought we needed new data, and we needed to understand better what the people across the country felt was important for children, which of course is that they all have a strong start. Some of the populations that we felt were of most interest were Republican mothers as well as Tea Party voters, to see if they had learned as much as all of us have about the importance of early learning, and if so, how it might influence their views. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Catriona Macdonald, who has been the Grow America Stronger campaign manager this year. Among other things, she is a terrific advocate for children, and will explain to you the great findings we had in this report and how instrumental they have been in our advocacy this year. Catriona?
Thank you, and thank you so much for the opportunity to share this information. The First 5 Years Fund was excited to do a poll this past summer, partly because we feel like many members of Congress understand the economic benefits and high importance from a policy perspective of expanding and improving early childhood education. That's not to say that we need to stop educating folks about that or that every member of Congress understands the benefits of early childhood education to our nation's economy as well as to children and families. But we wanted to help people understand the political case for high-quality early childhood education as well. So we decided to do a poll that would demonstrate what we were pretty confident was a bipartisan well of public support for early childhood education. I have to say, even we could not have anticipated the results that our poll found. And we're excited to talk both about the poll findings and then a little bit about how you can use those poll findings in your advocacy. So FFYF went out into the field during the summer, right after the 4th of July holiday, and we chose 2 firms whose logos you see on the bottom of the screen. The lead pollster was Public Opinion Strategies, which did the polling for the McCain and Romney campaigns in partnership with Hart Research, our Democratic partners. And we picked Public Opinion Strategies because we wanted to make sure that we could not deliberately or unconsciously put our thumb on the scale and weight the poll in a way that would give us the answers that we were looking for. We really wanted to make sure that this was an honest poll that would give true and accurate information. 800 registered voters were surveyed. The margin of error for the poll is a little less than 3.5%. It was a proportionally distributed poll, both geographically, demographically, and conducted by a bipartisan team. We began the poll by laying out multiple things that people might think should be important as a country. We gave people about 8 choices and asked them to say if they thought that these national priorities were very important, were important, or not that important to them. It is not surprising that increasing jobs and economic growth had the highest possible results. People are very concerned about the economy, and that clearly came through in the poll. What was surprising to us was that some of the things that had been in the press quite a lot polled relatively low. So infrastructure investments, 54% of the people polled thought that they were important. Securing our borders, which has gotten a lot of press, 63% of people thought that that was important. Interestingly, reducing the tax burden on families, more than 70% of people thought that that was important, but high quality early education, making sure that children get a strong start in life so they perform better in school and succeed in their careers, outpolled reducing the tax burden on families by 13%. Voters are worried about their children, their families' ability to get ahead, and they fully understand that having kids ready to learn in kindergarten is a critical piece of making that happen. Overwhelmingly, voters say that we should be doing more to ensure that children start kindergarten ready to do their best, and very few people think that we should be doing less than we are doing right now. One of the things that our pollsters told us is anytime you have a finding where the number of people who support something is twice the number who oppose it, that is an important and meaningful finding in the poll. So on this slide, you can clearly see the number of people, the percentage of people who think we ought to be doing more is well over double the number of people, percentage of people who think that we're doing enough. That's a meaningful finding, and you will see that throughout the poll, the percentages of people who support early childhood education is more than double the number of people who oppose it. It was also interesting to us that voters across the political spectrum say that we ought to be doing more. It's not surprising that Democrats in the poll were particularly strongly supportive, but even when we looked at independents and Republicans, we've got strong groups of people, strong margins saying we need to do more. More than 2/3 of the respondents think that 50% of our kids or fewer are showing up at kindergarten with the skills they need to learn. Again, this taps into this deep well of concern that we see across voters. They don't believe that children are getting what they need before kindergarten in order to get what they need. So we wanted to be very concrete, and we laid out the high-level details of the proposal that the President rolled out in his State of the Union and in his budget. We didn't identify it as the President's plan. Our Republican pollsters told us that if we identified it as the President's plan, it would be dead on arrival with Republicans. But we did go into a fair amount of detail about the proposal. We told people that Congress is considering a plan that helps states and local communities provide better early childhood education. We said it was birth to 5. We were very specific. This is a big investment, $10 billion a year for 10 years that would go to states focused on 4-year-olds, voluntary access to high-quality preschool programs. We talked about education and care for infants and toddlers, home visiting, and parent education. And we were very clear the plan would be paid for by a 94-cent per pack increase in the cigarette tax, and it would not add to the budget deficit. We wanted people, when they were thinking about this proposal, to understand it was very big and it would be paid for by a new tax. When we asked that question, 7 out of 10 people polled said they would strongly support that proposal. And again, half of them were strongly in support, more than double the percentage that strongly opposed. Again, the majority of voters across the political spectrum, including 3 out of 5 folks who identified themselves as Republican, indicated support for this proposal. And a whopping 84% of Democrats supported it. When you are looking at electoral politics, there are certain key subgroups that politicians particularly care about. Both parties, Democrats and Republicans, acknowledge that if they are going to be competitive in control of Congress and control of the White House, there are certain voting subgroups that are particularly important. Hispanics are very important. And there has been something of a perception, I think, in the early childhood community that Hispanic families are very traditional when it comes to care of young children, that they prefer not to put their children into child care centers and would rather have a family member, abuela or grandma, taking care of young children. But 83% of Hispanics polled supported this proposal. Folks who split their votes between parties, independents, strongly supported, and suburban women, strongly supported. All of those groups are considered by political analysts in Washington to be key to the Democratic or Republican Party's future ability to win national races. When we outlined the proposal, we threw a lot of information at people. And so we went back and reminded voters in the poll that the proposal is deficit neutral and is paid for. When people are explicitly reminded that this will not add to the deficit, their support increases further. And that is true across the board. But most interestingly, and this is the statistic that our Republican pollsters told us. If they had not done the poll themselves, they never would have believed this. We had about 50%, 49% of self-identified Tea Party voters in this poll telling us that they thought that this plan was something that they could support. When we explicitly reminded them that the proposal was deficit neutral, that moved 15 points. And 64% of self-identified Tea Party voters said that they would support a new tax to invest $100 billion over the next 10 years in early childhood programs run by states and communities. That is an astonishing finding. And that is something that we think we should be shouting from the rooftops when we are talking to Republican members of Congress. Because often when we go in to talk to Republican elected officials, whether they are state legislators or senators, representatives, we hear from them that they support early childhood education, but voters in their districts don't want new taxes, aren't willing to pay for new initiatives, that this is just not that important to them. It's not as high a priority as other things like reducing taxes. And what we found in this poll is that even self-identified Tea Party voters support expanding early childhood education resources as long as it is deficit neutral. And you can look at this screen and see strong percentages, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, believe that this is an important investment for our country to make. We then went through and tested different parts of the President's proposal. Every element that we tested was perceived to be important. Interestingly, of the various aspects of the poll or of the proposal, the part that had the weakest level of support still got 76% of the respondents saying that they thought it was very important or somewhat important. But the weakest area was home visiting and parent education. We don't believe that that means that voters do not support home visiting or parent education. We think that that is the piece of the proposal that voters are least familiar with. So when you talk about making early education and childcare more affordable, people know exactly what that means, and they have a picture of it in their head. When you talk about building better preschool services for parents and making them more accessible to children from low and moderate income families, they understand what that means. When you talk about home visiting and parent education, that's a squishier concept. Fewer people have been personally engaged in that, and so they don't understand it as well. And we think that that's the reason why that element of the proposal polls a little weaker. Again, we broke out by Republican, Independent, and Democratic voters support for the parts of the proposal, and across the board, whether it was Republican or Democratic voters, we had strong support for each part of this proposal. And interestingly, we often think that early childhood education is an issue that doesn't have much urgency. Lots of people think it's important, but many people don't seem to think that is something we need to act on now. In this poll, voters were asked, is this something that Congress should move on and take action on now, or is it a low priority and something that Congress should move to the bottom of the to-do list? And again, by almost a 2-to-1 margin, voters in this poll thought that this was something that Congress should take action on right away. We also wanted to test, is there an upside for members of Congress if they vote for this proposal, and is there a possible downside? So we found that voters who support early childhood education are more likely to vote for a member of Congress if that member supports this proposal. A few people, 17%, said that they were less likely to vote for a member of Congress if he or she voted in support of expanding early childhood education in this way. But for most people, it makes no difference. This finding, sort of counterintuitively, is a good thing because it means that there is not a lot of downside for members of Congress to vote for this. There is an upside. 40% of people said they'd be more likely to vote for a member of Congress who supported this. So 82% of voters either don't care, won't hold it against a member, or will give them, more likely to give them their vote if they vote yes. The percentage of people who would punish a member of Congress for supporting this is very small, and that's why that statistic is meaningful. We really wanted to make sure that we were doing everything we could to make this poll as even-handed and accurate as possible. And so at the end of the poll, we went through the arguments opposed to the plan and in favor of the plan. And you heard from Lynette's generous introduction of me. I have worked for Democratic members of Congress. My personal opinion is that in our arguments for and against the proposal, we were a lot tougher in criticizing the proposal than we were in making the case for it. So when we offered up possible objections, we used the strongest language possible. We really waved the red flag in front of any bulls out there who might be looking for reasons to oppose early childhood education. So we laid out for respondents in this poll the pros and the cons. On the plus side, we said, this proposal is a good idea. Quality early childhood programs help parents give their children a strong start by building the skills they need to succeed in school, career, and life. They help boost student performance, they improve high school graduation rates, and ensure students can get the jobs of the 21st century with higher earnings. This proposal will provide states with the funding and flexibility to build their own high-quality programs without adding to the deficit. So all of that is true, but it's not maybe the most powerful case you can make for early childhood education. We then presented arguments against this. And we threw in all of the buzzwords that we could think of that might spike people to oppose the proposal. So we suggested that some people would argue, this proposal is a bad idea. Government will be injecting itself yet again into parents' private decisions and forcing states to create programs they may not need or want. We can't afford another huge government entitlement program that costs billions of dollars. If parents want their children to attend pre-kindergarten, it is their responsibility to find the right one and pay for it. So after hearing these arguments, pro and con, still 62% of respondents said that this proposal was a good idea and they would support it. And only 36% said it was a bad idea and should not be supported. So where do we go from here? The bottom line is clearly early childhood and the benefits it provides are viewed as important national priorities for voters. And in this poll, we turned on its head some assumptions like people are more interested, families are more concerned about reducing their tax burden than they are about supporting high-quality early education. There is strong support at a very high level, generally, for high-quality early education. And when you lay out the specifics of the plan, there is even more support to make significant investments in this area. Voters perceive that this is a need, that it's a need that can be addressed. They approve of the idea that the plan would be deficit neutral, and they want Congress to act on it soon. Even when you throw the toughest possible criticism at it, support for the proposal stands up. We think that this is terrific evidence that not only is early childhood education good policy, it's also good politics. And we look forward to working with you, continuing to work with you to get this message out. So Kris, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Kat, thank you very, very much. And this is the point in the call where we hope you have been engaged and intrigued and want to ask questions. And we have help with that through the webinar system and Child Care Aware staff. So why don't we quickly pivot to Q&A and see if anybody wants to ask us any questions.
Okay, great. Again, I want to reiterate what Kris just said. If you have any questions, please use the chat box function located on the right side of your screen. We're waiting for some of those questions to trickle in. I just want to remind everyone that if they would like to see the recording of this webinar or share this with some folks who may not have been able to join today, you can get that information from our website on our webinar page, and that website address is usa.childcareaware.org/webinars. Okay, so we have a question. Is Congress interested in drafting a bipartisan early learning bill?
Well, either one of us could answer that question, but before we get into any of the specific details, which do change, every day, maybe every hour, it was always the intention of First 5 Years Fund to work in a very bipartisan way, long before this year ever happened, but especially this year, because we were hopeful that there would be Republican champions for an early learning investment, not only because we saw the poll results, but many folks in Congress from both parties have been helpful on early childhood in the past, and we thought that this would be an opportunity for some to have make a legacy decision around an increased investment. But we know things have gotten very, very difficult since we launched this campaign, and it's difficult, frankly, for folks from both sides of the aisle to step up and be leaders on this in terms of congressional leadership. We're still very hopeful that the administration who launched the effort in the first place will not let go of this commitment, and that they will bring some of the congressional leaders along with them in this effort. Kat, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. So there is legislation being drafted. Chairman Harkin of Iowa is taking the lead in the Senate in drafting a bill that would implement the president's proposal, and Congressman Miller of California is working on the counterpart piece of legislation in the House. Both Chairman Miller and Chairman Harkin and Congressman Miller have been reaching out aggressively to Republicans so that it can be bipartisan legislation, and Secretary Duncan has had many, many conversations with Senate and House Republicans looking for bipartisan co-sponsors. The partisanship in Congress has gotten so bad that I think it is at this point unlikely that the bill to implement the president's proposal will be a bipartisan bill. And that is why the legislation has not been introduced yet, because they don't have Republican co-sponsors. In the Senate and in the House, there are currently small groups of Republicans who care about early childhood, who are working on drafting alternative language, legislation for early childhood that would probably have a smaller price tag and would work in a different way. And Secretary Duncan has indicated that once they have their ideas more fully fleshed out, he would like to work with them to see if there can be a meeting of the minds. That process is going to take quite a long time, and I am very hopeful that in 2014 we'll all have a bill to be advocating around and rallying around and probably tweaking and improving. In the meantime, Child Care Aware and the First 5 Years Fund and many other advocacy groups in DC and around the country are pushing very hard to have a down payment of resources for early childhood education included in whatever fiscal budget debt ceiling continuing resolution agreement might be able to be reached in the next 2 to 6 weeks. Obviously, the first thing that needs to happen from our point of view in whatever is agreed to is that the government needs to be reopened, the debt ceiling needs to be raised, and the sequester needs to be fixed. But we are pushing very hard with negotiators, Republicans, Democrats, and the White House that the highest priority after fixing the sequester and getting the government basic operations open again should be a down payment of resources for early childhood education.
Excellent. I have another question here. The question is, do you know what kinds of phrases and arguments have been effective with Republicans and Tea Party members? And I guess Kat or Kris can take a...
Kat, why don't you start with this one?
Sure. So there are a few messages that we find work with Republicans. Talking about the business community and its strong support for high-quality early childhood education is helpful. We also talk about the sheriffs, the police officers, the attorney generals, the prosecutors who are advocating for better investments in early childhood education because they see the difference that it makes. We talk about states are predicting the need for jail cells and prison capacity based on third grade reading scores. And high quality early childhood education gives kids the skills that they need to start off right in those early grades in kindergarten, first, second, third grade, and get their learning on a trajectory that leads to success in school, that keeps them out of the welfare system, the juvenile justice system, the criminal justice system. Again, with Tea Party voters, this poll found that emphasizing that the proposal is paid for, that it can be done without adding to the deficit, is very important. We have tried in the past to use the arguments of folks like Nobel economist James Heckman, who argues that early childhood education, when it's high quality and targeted at low-income kids, that produces a very high return on investment, 7 to 10% per year over the lifetime of a child, that there is no investment the government can make that generates a higher return. All of that works up to a point. Sometimes, particularly more conservative members will say, well, that's great if we had money to invest, but we don't have money to invest. We have a deficit right now. Dr. Heckman's response is, if somebody gave you the opportunity to borrow money at 2 or 3% per year, and you knew that you were going to get a guaranteed 7 to 10% return per year, is that something you'd be willing to borrow money for? That works with moderate Republicans. That is not successful with more conservative Republicans. So emphasizing that this poll shows people are willing to raise the tobacco tax in order to pay for this, and it's deficit neutral. That is helpful. Pointing out that Republican governors are expanding early childhood in many states, and in many cases they are raising tobacco taxes in order to do that, that this is not a Democratic idea or a Republican idea. This is actually something that many Republican governors have helped to lead the way with, is also helpful. So those are the messages that we have found are helpful. The other thing that I would remind everyone is sometimes the message is always important, but sometimes the messenger is really the key. So Catriona Macdonald, who worked for Senator Kennedy, can have the perfect Republican talking points, assuming that such a thing exists. but I don't have credibility with certain Republican members of Congress. And no matter what I say, they're going to have a hard time believing me or agreeing with me. The same thing said by somebody else who has greater credibility with that audience would be much more persuasive. So as you think about advocating, I would encourage you to think not just about the message, and the message is certainly important, but I would encourage you to think about the messenger too. And who are the messengers that you can recruit and send to Republican, whether it's state legislators or city council members or members of Congress, who have credibility with that audience.
Excellent. And Kris, did you want to add anything there? Or?
No, I think Kat is spot on with how it's more than just the message, but the messenger, and that we also have been partnering with Pew and others who work hard on home visiting. As you know, that was part of the proposal, and that has traditionally been a place where Republicans have been supportive. And so it's helpful to have it be part of the overarching policy that's being recommended right now. And of course, First 5 Years Fund is really supportive of home visiting programs, as they're all really very, very helpful in supporting children, whether they're in child care or preschool or Head Start. That those are really great for identifying kids who may need additional supports, families that may need additional help, or referrals to additional services. And Republicans see that connection is really useful.
Yes.
Yeah, I would also quickly add, there are some things that we also know don't work. So, for example, talking about universal pre-kindergarten does not resonate with Republicans in Washington. I know that the state experience is sometimes different, but in D.C., at the federal level, when you start talking about universal, Republicans perceive that that means we're going to tax people to pay for child care for families who can afford it and are currently willing to pay. And they see that as squeezing out, with federal funds, money that families and the private sector, employers in some case, are willing to pay. So even though universal and that language plays very well in some states, and certainly with in polls with middle-class voters, we find that that is a showstopper when you're talking to Republican federal elected officials.
Okay, great. There's another question here in reference to messaging. So how do you bring this information down to the state level? How would you suggest that folks in the state speak about this?
Well, the good news is not only the poll results, but all kinds of other media tools are available on the Grow America Stronger website right now. So anybody that's looking at their computer now or can go on later and look at the Grow America Stronger .com website, you will be able to pull up a 2-page summary of the poll as well as lots of other coverage. So if you're in a state, you're a city, a county, a neighborhood, those results are something that you could learn in a few minutes, and if anyone were to ask you personally about them, you would have those facts handy. If you wanted to generate any additional attention to this effort, you can do all kinds of things. There are advocates in many, many states that work statewide, and we can connect you with them and all of the efforts that they may have underway. And you can speak directly to our campaign staff, even, the child care aware people. Lynette and her team have been very involved from the very beginning, are extremely familiar with everything we're trying to do. And you can get everything from, sample op-eds and other kinds of articles people generate about the programs they run, as well as the data we presented today to help you in doing that. We really do believe that the more coverage there is in states of the issues that we're all facing, the shortages for kids that need child care, the shortages in Head Start, the impact of the sequester, And not to mention, frankly, just that the whole world of birth to 5 care has been so woefully underfunded for so long that the new investment does provide some hope for all of us to see a new way forward, to allow us to get more kids in, to help all of you with the needs you have, whether they be with materials or space or wages. We know that the new investment can do something to help with those things, and so please, by all means, ask us for more specific advice depending on where you live and who you're connected to. Kat, do you want to add anything?
Nope, that was great. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Another question here. So it says here, I missed the first part of the presentation, unfortunately. I'm wondering if you tested the argument that parents should be providing early childhood learning, not government, or something to that effect. It seems to be the counter argument that this person is hearing a lot in their state.
So certainly in certain circles you will hear that, and we are not suggesting that we have the silver bullet to persuade every single one of the 435 members of Congress that early childhood education is the best thing since sliced bread. However, having said that, we did test that argument in the closing slide. It talked about how we threw everything, including the kitchen sink, at the proposal. And we explicitly said that it's a parental responsibility to find and pay for early childhood education. Even hearing that, 63% of voters involved in the poll still supported early childhood education. When we look at the crosstabs and you look at the difference between who was supporting it previously, whose support we lost when we made that really strong argument against the proposal, it's interesting. So we hung on to Democrats, we hung on to women, including stay-at-home moms. And one of the very interesting findings in this poll, and again counterintuitive, stay-at-home moms strongly support expanded investments in early childhood education. The folks that we lost were predominantly white men. And that was the difference between more than 7 out of 10 voters supporting the proposal, and then you throw all of the conservative traditional arguments against it, and support goes down to 63%. We find that when we are talking to Republican members in DC, the folks who are most likely to believe that parents should have responsibility with no help from taxpayer-funded programs seem to believe that more strongly for kids who are 3 or 4 years old and close to the age of school entry. And interestingly, they are more inclined to support investments in early childhood education for infants and toddlers. And I think enough of the scientific research about the importance of those neural connections and brain architecture growth at the very young ages has sunk in. So as we've been working on the President's proposal, we have had reports from a number of state-based advocates that they went in and talked about the President's proposal for providing support for pre-kindergarten, and Republican members that they were talking to had a very hard time with that and were not that engaged and not that interested. Some of the very savvy state advocates then pivoted to talking about the shortage of care for infants and toddlers and how expensive it is and how difficult it is, even if you can afford it, to find high quality care, and the fact that more than 80% of mothers of infants under a year old are in the workforce, and what that means to low-income, at-risk children to not have safe, reliable, high-quality care. And they were able to engage even some fairly conservative Republicans in that policy discussion when they had a much harder time with the 4-year-olds. So again, that's counterintuitive. I would not suggest it would work in every congressional office, but I offer that experience in case it's helpful to the person asking the question.
Okay, great. Looking at the questions coming in, there are actually a lot of questions, and I'm looking at the time as well. So I want to say, in interest of the time, we went a little bit over here. I want to field one more question, and the rest we can follow up in an email to everyone else here. So the one question is, what are the next steps? So what can we do and what can be done?
Kris, do you want to take that one?
I think you should. I know that isn't what you wanted me to say, but I actually think you're the one who knows the answer to that.
So we are broadcasting the message wide and as clearly as possible that this is an opportunity for anybody who cares about early childhood education to put your shoulder to the wheel and help try to push us over the top in securing a down payment of significant resources for early childhood education in this huge, messy negotiation that has started in Washington, D.C. Our goal at the FFYF is to have every member of Congress in the next 2 or 3 weeks receive a telephone call from 2 or 3 people that they know and whose opinion they value and trust, saying to that member of Congress, early childhood education is one of the smartest pro-economic growth investments our country can make. And it is good politics for you to support it. Will you please call the leaders of your political party in Congress and urge them to support substantial investments in early childhood education? And we are not shy. We are asking for $20 to $30 billion in this debt negotiation. If you as child care resource and referral agencies are deeply connected in your community, and I think that just about everybody on this webinar knows at least one person who has been willing to advocate for early childhood education, who has a connection to congressional leaders from your community. Or maybe you don't know the member of Congress, but you have a great relationship with a state legislator who has been an advocate at the state level for early childhood education. Could you call your state legislator and ask your state legislator to call the United States Senator or call the member of Congress? The First 5 Years Fund has done a 1-page background sheet and a set of talking points. Lynette and her team here have the backgrounder and those talking points. If they're helpful to you as a starting place, please put them in your own words, add information about your own community to them. We want to help in any way that we can, but we need you, because you are embedded in the community, to pull together early childhood advocates to make this ask. And this is not 1,000 phone calls, 1,000 emails. This is not an overwhelm the switchboards kind of an operation, because congressional offices are very short-staffed and many are closed right now. But remember, every member of Congress is still working. Every chief of staff has not been furloughed. Every district director is still at his or her desk. And you probably know people in your community who care about early childhood, who can get a call into the district director, the chief of staff, the member of Congress in the next 10 to 14 days. And that's what we need to do.
Excellent. And before we close out today, I did want to thank everyone for joining today's webinar. I wanted to thank UCAT and Kris for presenting today. And I want everyone on the call to know that Child Care Aware of America is committed to working with First 5 Years Fund and Grow America Stronger to get all the resources you need to make sure that you can echo those arguments for early education in your state. Someone just reminded me that there is a Twitter storm today at 2 o'clock that we hope that you all will participate in. Just, sending out messages through Twitter urging your members to work together to pass a CR. So, Kris, Kat, if you don't have anything else to mention, I guess we're going to close out today's webinar. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynette, Jasmine. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks. Bye, everyone.